Let's talk about the Middle East, a region steeped in history, culture, and unfortunately, conflict. It's a place where ancient civilizations once thrived and where the world's major religions have their roots. But in recent times, it has become synonymous with instability and strife. A region where tension is always simmering beneath the surface, a delicate balance constantly threatened by a multitude of factors. Border disputes, religious differences, and political rivalries all contribute to the volatile atmosphere. Just a spark away from disaster. A single misstep, a misinterpreted action, or a calculated provocation could ignite a chain reaction with devastating consequences. The region is a powder keg, waiting for the inevitable. On June 13, 2025, that spark finally arrived. A day that will be etched in the annals of history as the beginning of a new and dangerous chapter in the Middle East. The shadow war between Iran and Israel, a long-simmering conflict fought through proxies and covert operations, was about to explode into the open. Decades of animosity and mistrust were about to reach a boiling point, erupted into open conflict. The carefully constructed facade of restraint crumbled, giving way to a full-blown military confrontation. The gloves were off, and the stakes were higher than ever before. It wasn't a slow build-up, a gradual escalation of hostilities. There was no period of tense negotiations or diplomatic maneuvering. It was an immediate, explosive escalation, a sudden and violent eruption that caught the world off guard. The speed and intensity of the conflict were shocking. News channels showed the skies over Tehran, once a symbol of Iranian pride and progress, lit up by Israeli strikes. The night sky was ablaze with anti-aircraft fire and the devastating impact of incoming missiles. The city was under siege. This was no proxy fight, no indirect engagement through third parties. This wasn't about supporting rebel groups or funding insurgencies, but direct, state-on-state warfare. Two nations with their own armies, navies, and air forces locked in a deadly embrace. Within hours, the situation deteriorated rapidly. The initial strikes triggered a cascade of retaliatory actions and counterattacks. The idea of a contained operation vanished. Any hope of limiting the scope of the conflict was quickly extinguished. The fire was spreading. Sirens became the new normal, a constant reminder of the imminent danger. The piercing wail echoed through the streets, sending civilians scrambling for shelter in both countries. From the bustling metropolis of Tel Aviv to the ancient city of Isfahan, no place was safe. Decades of threats and covert operations, of espionage and sabotage, of proxy wars and cyber attacks, finally boiled over. The pressure had been building for years, and now the dam had burst, turning theory into terrifying reality. War games and strategic simulations were now replaced by the grim reality of death and destruction. The world watched in horror as the events unfolded with alarming speed. Governments scrambled to respond, and international organizations convened emergency meetings. As the region lurched into a new, unstable era, the foundations of the existing order were shaken, and the future was uncertain. Stock markets trembled as investors panicked, and uncertainty gripped the global economy. Oil prices soared, threatening to trigger a global recession. The world's energy supply was now at risk, and the UN scrambled to issue statements calling for an immediate cessation of hostilities and a return to the negotiating table. Of deep concern, a phrase that echoed through the halls of power, but did little to alleviate the suffering on the ground. Diplomatic code for helplessness. The international community seemed powerless to stop the escalating violence. As days passed, it became clear that this was not just a localized conflict. The repercussions were being felt around the world. This was a conflict fueled by deep fears, by historical grievances, and by a desperate desire for security, and ambitions, by the pursuit of regional dominance and the projection of power, already spiraling out of control, threatening to engulf the entire region in a wider war. Strongly worded letters weren't going to stop the violence, nor were empty promises of support. For millions caught in the crossfire, ordinary people whose lives were shattered by the conflict, the nightmare had only just begun, and the future remained shrouded in darkness. Why did this happen? What chain of events led us to this critical juncture? What were the underlying tensions, the unspoken fears, and the strategic calculations that culminated in this moment of crisis? At the heart of this conflict lies Iran's nuclear program, a source of intense international scrutiny and deep-seated anxieties. The program's stated purpose is peaceful energy production, but its potential for weaponization casts a long shadow. For Israel, a nuclear Iran is not merely a geopolitical challenge, it's an existential threat, a nightmare scenario that could reshape the balance of power in the Middle East and beyond. A red line they refuse to let be crossed, a point of no return that would trigger a swift and decisive response. This red line has been a constant in Israeli policy for years, a clear signal of their unwavering determination. Iran, on the other hand, insists its program is entirely peaceful, aimed at generating electricity and advancing scientific research. They argue that they have a sovereign right to develop nuclear technology for peaceful purposes. But few believe it, and international skepticism has led to crippling sanctions and diplomatic isolation. The international community fears that Iran's nuclear ambitions extend beyond peaceful applications. For Tehran, nuclear capability is about survival, a deterrent against potential aggression and a symbol of national pride. It's seen as a way to ensure their security in a turbulent region, and defiance against what they perceive as Western interference and domination. It's a statement of independence and a refusal to be dictated to by outside powers. This feud isn't new. It's a deeply rooted conflict with a long and complex history. It's been simmering since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, a watershed moment that transformed the region and ushered in a new era of ideological and political rivalry. Years of assassinations, targeting key figures in Iran's nuclear program, cyber attacks, designed to disrupt and sabotage Iran's nuclear facilities, and proxy wars fought through allied groups in Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen, set the stage for direct conflict, creating an atmosphere of mistrust and animosity. The final trigger intelligence that Iran was closer than ever to a bomb, a point of no return in the eyes of its adversaries, a hardline Israeli government, determined to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons at any cost, and a volatile global climate marked by increasing geopolitical instability and uncertainty. Israel gambled on a preemptive strike, a high-stakes decision with potentially catastrophic consequences, hoping to cripple Iran's capabilities and set back its nuclear program by years. It was a monumental risk, a gamble with the fate of the region hanging in the balance, plunging the region into chaos, unleashing a wave of violence and instability that threatens to engulf the entire Middle East. Once again, history's ghosts, the specters of past conflicts and unresolved grievances, return to haunt the living, shaping the present and casting a dark shadow over the future. Israel's opening move was a masterclass in modern warfare. Operation Khalavi wasn't just airstrikes, it was a coordinated digital and physical assault. Israeli intelligence used satellites, hacked phones, and deep-cover agents to map out Iran's defenses. AI-driven attacks eliminated key Iranian figures and disabled air defenses, leaving Iran exposed. The Israeli Air Force struck dozens of targets, from nuclear sites to IRGC headquarters, with chilling precision. Iran's leadership was left reeling, their infrastructure turned against them. The world watched, stunned by the speed and scale of Israel's digital war. Iran had to respond, and fast. Tehran launched Promise Verdadera 3, firing its new Fatah-1 hypersonic missiles at Israel. The reality most were intercepted by Israel's advanced air defenses, but a few got through, causing fires and casualties. Air raid sirens wailed across Israeli cities, forcing millions into shelters. Even limited success was a propaganda win for Iran, showing they could still strike back. For Israelis, the attack shattered any sense of safety. For Iranians, it was a desperate show of defiance amid devastation. Iran's leadership tried to turn military defeat into psychological victory. The missile barrages escalated the conflict, fueling fear on both sides. The war was now personal, and no one felt safe. In war, leaders become symbols. Ayatollah Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader, framed the conflict as holy resistance, vowing never to surrender. He warned the U.S. that intervention would bring irreparable damage. On the other side, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu declared the war a fight for Israel's survival, projecting strength and control. Both leaders painted their nations as righteous victims, rallying their people for a long, brutal fight. Neither offered compromise, only escalation. Khamenei clung to revolutionary ideals, seeing struggle as destiny. Netanyahu, ever the hawk, believed only force could guarantee Israel's safety. Their worldviews were irreconcilable, locking both nations into conflict. Two men, two visions. Each convinced history would vindicate them. The result? A collision course with no off-ramp. For ordinary people, war is a nightmare. In Iran, Israeli strikes triggered mass exodus and blackouts, with hundreds of civilians killed in days. In Israel, missile alerts forced families into shelters, disrupting daily life and deepening social divides. Wealthier Israelis had better protection. Marginalized communities were left exposed. The psychological toll was immense. Fear, uncertainty, and grief became daily realities. Iranians felt betrayed by a regime that failed to protect them. Israelis faced a new level of terror from state-level missile attacks. Internet outages and infrastructure collapse deepened isolation. Leaders spoke of strategy, but it was civilians who paid the price. Under a sky of steel, normal life vanished. As the bombs fell, the world scrambled for solutions. The UN called emergency meetings, issuing pleas for restraint that fell on deaf ears. The US backed Israel, while warning against direct intervention. Iran threatened catastrophe if America joined the fight. Europe tried to revive nuclear talks, but divisions ran deep. Russia offered to mediate, more for influence than peace. The international response was fragmented and ineffective. With global powers split, the path to peace seemed further away than ever. On the ground, perspectives were shaped by fear and survival. Many Israelis, despite the terror, supported the war as a grim necessity. Decades of existential threats had hardened resolve. The government's message of no choice resonated, even as missiles fell. In Iran, the regime pushed unity, but many civilians blamed their leaders for inviting disaster. Years of repression and hardship fueled resentment, but Israeli attacks also stirred nationalism. Iranians faced terror from above and oppression at home. The war deepened divisions, with Israelis united in purpose and Iranians trapped between two threats. For both, hope was in short supply. The cycle of violence only seemed to reinforce itself. Where does this leave us, as we try to make sense of the complex web of alliances, animosities, and ambitions that define the Middle East? The situation is incredibly precarious, and the path forward is fraught with danger, on a knife's edge. A delicate balance hangs in the air, threatening to tip into full-blown regional conflict. Israel is unlikely to stop, driven by what it perceives as an existential threat to its very survival, until it believes Iran's nuclear threat is gone. The pursuit of nuclear weapons by Iran is seen as an unacceptable risk by Israel, a red line that cannot be crossed. Meaning more strikes, a continuation of the cycle of violence that has plagued the region for far too long. More destruction. The consequences of these actions are devastating, leaving behind a trail of shattered lives and broken infrastructure. Iran, unable to win outright, faces significant challenges in a direct confrontation. Will keep fighting, determined to exert its influence and protect its interests in the region, using missiles, a key component of its military strategy and a tool for projecting power, and proxies, leveraging its network of allies and partners to advance its agenda, to prolong the war. This strategy allows Iran to maintain pressure on its adversaries without directly engaging in large-scale conventional warfare. Both sides are locked, entrenched in their positions, unwilling to compromise. In a deadly stalemate, a situation where neither party can achieve a decisive victory, with no easy exit. The current trajectory points towards a long and protracted conflict, with no clear resolution in sight. The international community remains divided, unable to forge a unified response to the crisis, and largely powerless. Diplomatic efforts have so far failed to yield any meaningful progress, leaving the region vulnerable to further escalation. The risk of wider escalation looms large, threatening to engulf the entire region in a devastating war. Drawing in Russia, which has its own strategic interests in the Middle East and could be tempted to intervene more directly. Closing the Strait of Hormuz, a critical choke point for global oil supplies, would have catastrophic consequences for the world economy. Grows by the day, the potential for miscalculation and unintended consequences is alarmingly high. The region has been transformed, irrevocably altered by years of conflict and instability. The shadow war, fought in the shadows by intelligence agencies and special forces, has become increasingly overt, now a blazing inferno. The flames of conflict are spreading rapidly, consuming everything in their path. The human cost is staggering, measured in lives lost, families displaced, and communities destroyed. And the scars, both physical and emotional, run deep, will last generations. The trauma of war will continue to haunt the region for decades to come. Hopes for a diplomatic solution, a negotiated settlement that addresses the underlying causes of the conflict, seem distant, fading with each passing day as the violence escalates and trust erodes. Almost naive. The prospects for peace appear increasingly bleak in the face of entrenched animosities and competing interests. The world watches with a mixture of concern and helplessness, bracing for a storm, a potential catastrophe that could have far-reaching consequences for global security and stability, with no end in sight. The future of the Middle East remains uncertain, shrouded in a fog of war and political intrigue.